Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, I'm Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our new book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. All right, now that I'm through the introduction where I can't even properly introduce myself, I can put my funny hat back on.
Good. We're going to have a hat. That's all I wanted to know.
Talk seriously with clown hair on my head.
Might make you more intelligent. You never know.
Not when you're looking at me. So for everyone listening, we're recording around the Halloween time where I might have had a meeting where I needed to wear a costume. So I wore my very colorful Halloween hat. I encourage you to check out the YouTube video. And I can't speak and introduce myself with a straight face with Justin sitting over here smirking. Let's see. All right, we have a fun guest. Let's chat.
Yes, we have a great guest today because now we're heading into the C-suite to talk about privacy and security. So today we have Gary Vecchiarelli, Chief Financial Officer of CleanSpark, Inc. He brings more than 2 decades of experience in finance and accounting with a specific focus on planned mergers, acquisitions, and debt financing. He has held senior positions with multiple publicly traded high-growth companies. During his tenure in public accounting, Gary opened BDO's Las Vegas audit practice. His clients have ranged in size from $50 million to over $1 billion, covering multiple industries. Gary, how are you today?
Morning, great. I feel a little underdressed.
That's okay. He didn't bring his costume either.
Yes, it's all my fault.
His really good costume actually got ruined in the winter last year by our daughter, who thought it would make a great snow collector. So Gary, Justin really highlighted a bit of your background, but we always like to ask people how their career evolved to their current role.
Thanks for having me and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
So it's very exciting. So my background, like Justin said, the first half of my career was in public accounting. So I was mainly focused on middle market companies, which are typically high growth, very entrepreneurial. So many of those companies face different challenges than their Fortune 1000 counterparts. They're often very focused on running the business versus worrying about compliance, regulations, or even privacy and security. And then the second half of my career went into private and primarily worked for companies operating in the market space. So worked in a few different industries. Living in Las Vegas, a little hard to get away from gaming. So I have some gaming and hospitality background, and then joined CleanSpark here December last year. So it's been quite a progression. But a CPA by trade, with license in 2006. And so internal controls, financial reporting, Excel spreadsheets, all that good stuff is near and dear to my heart. So
I started my career that way. I started at Deloitte.
Oh, did you?
Financial statement auditor. I did. I had my 3 fancy letters.
Indeed.
They're too hard to keep up. So I couldn't keep up with all of the training for that and for privacy. I had to pick one. So I decided to pick the current profession when I moved over to privacy.
There you go. So from a CFO perspective, Gary, how do you view managing security from a financial management perspective?
Great question. So From a financial perspective, it's important really to control risk, right? And so it's less about the actual money and being part of a budget, right? It's about how you're laying out costs and what you're doing to prevent events happening in the future, whether it be a data breach or a hack or something like that. So from my perspective, it's really a lot of risk management. When you look a lot at the various internal control frameworks that are out there, one of which is called COBIT, which is based on the COSO internal control framework. Items like COBIT really exist to help prepare a framework to prevent fraud and hacks and things like that. So from my perspective, it's almost kind of like insurance. It's important to have your firewalls and internal controls and pen testing and recovery plans and all of that in place, really to make sure that you got a tight ship to not take on any water and prevent anything unauthorized from happening. So I was going to finish by saying, that there's obviously huge financial consequences if there's a breach, right? Not just from a liability perspective, but even something as simple as social security numbers being breached and the cost of offering monitoring to those users who had their information access could potentially be in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, as we've seen with major cases over the last decade or so. So again, from the CFO perspective, a lot of it is risk management and making sure that we're being proactive versus reactive.
Thank you for that. So, I thought about this, but since you've got experience in gaming and some other very wide variety of industries, how does the industry of your company play in a role in how you think about privacy and security?
Yeah, so it's essential. So I'll draw a comparison for my current company. So CleanSpark is one of the world's largest publicly traded right now, and we don't have customers per se, so we don't have a lot of confidential information. Most of the confidential information that we have really relates to social security numbers of our employees, maybe some tax or identifying information for some of our vendors. And a lot of the Bitcoin transactions, in fact, all the Bitcoin transactions that run through our machines are encrypted. So we don't know who's transacting and what amount and where it's going from or to. That's much different than, let's take the casino or gaming environment, where you have where those environments have a lot of information. Right? Not only do they have a large number of employees, the social security numbers there, but they also have the tax information for all of the players because of the reporting requirements. There's also a lot of vendors. The casinos are required to do due diligence on many of the vendors that they work with, so there can be confidential information there. So it absolutely plays a role, and the industry is really going to define what the scope and what the risk is. And in some industries, it's going to be a lot greater. It's going to be greater with financial institutions, gaming companies, things like that. Less so for us, but nonetheless, everyone needs to worry about privacy and security in some regard because the risks really do vary by industry.
So you highlighted how a financial department has a lot of personal information. And what I find in talking to companies, they actually never think about the financial department. They always focus on the core operations, marketing, HR, where personal information is. But finance departments have that information. And as a result, finance departments tend not to think about privacy and security as much as they should. So why do you think it is that these departments continue to struggle with wire fraud that often originate from a phishing email?
Great question. So we all get those emails, right? Like I've gotten a text from our CEO multiple times from multiple numbers, saying everything from, hey, I need you to wire money to this company versus I need gift cards for tips. And so they're out there. We've all had those type of emails, but I think that ultimately it comes down to companies not doing a few things. Is one, having a good internal control environment. Two, communicating and training their people. These scammers really have gotten really good and sophisticated about social engineering and going for the people that might be a little scared to question the CEO, right? Because why not go after the AP clerk who's working on an hourly basis? They don't want to question the fact that the CEO might be number one. But in an internal control environment where you have properly designed controls and they're working efficiently, that would never happen. Let me give you an example. Even if our CEO were to ask someone to buy gift cards in any amount, that would require something called a purchase requisition. So in an internal control environment, at least the one that I'm used to and that I like to set up, is having those purchases and approvals approved in advance of actually encumbering or committing the company is an extra step to go ahead and prevent things like this. Now, if it's $25, maybe it ends up being a de minimis amount based on an authorization matrix you have, because the more material an amount is, maybe the more signatures you need. But having a basic process where, hey, you got to complete a form. Who am I going to charge this to? What account is it going to go to? How are we going to pay for it? And make sure that the proper people approve it in advance is one way that fraud can be prevented. In growing companies, many times they may not have built out internal control frameworks. Right? As a public company, we're subject to the provisions of Sarbanes-Oxley, and we adhere to the COSO standards. And so COSO standards and the framework really help reduce the probability that any fraud or really material misstatement would happen. But again, in these entrepreneurial, closely held companies, sometimes the only internal control is the owner gets the bank statements at his or her house and reviews them after the fact. And like I said in the beginning, a lot of these middle market or small companies are so focused on being entrepreneurial and growing that they just don't have sophisticated controls in place. But again, some basic controls like approving purchases before they happen is one way to really prevent a lot of that wire fraud we're seeing now.
The Sarbanes-Oxley work that you just mentioned harkens back when I left public accounting. I went to implement Sarbanes-Oxley at a very large organization here in Atlanta. So very familiar with the idea of internal controls. And Gary, you talked about the struggle for those smaller companies. And what I wanted to ask you is, since you've seen companies from 50 million to billions, where is a good place for a company to start realizing it's time for us to put in these internal controls? I mean, all of us sitting here might say at the very beginning, absolutely, you should do that. But for the person who might need a little bit extra convincing, is there a time that you've seen where there's been an event, there's been a something that's the trigger point to get them to take it seriously?
Yeah, so I would tell you, for all businesses, the time to do it was yesterday. It's just depending on what the scope is. So if you have a checking account, you should have some minimal controls in some regard. But then as you become more sophisticated and you have more users and more lines of business and more ways that you're facilitating payments or receiving bills, you need to scale with them. So I'd say every business needs to have some basic control. And the one that I had said earlier about the president and CEO receiving bank statements was one of the very basic controls where there's a bit of a segregation of duties. And that's really more of a detective control than a preventative control. And I say that because you'd only be able to detect it after the statement comes out, right? So a fraud happened on October 2nd, but you don't get the paper statement to your house until November 10th. You're now more than 30 days past that. And it may be unlikely that you're able to do anything about that then prevent it in the future. And so I think that a lot of businesses really need to have a preventative, really do a risk assessment, right? Hey, where is our risk? And what are some potential ways that people could commit fraud in the company? And then address controls that are appropriate. But as you know from your experience, right, a lot of us have PTSD from first implementing SOX because everyone's hair was on fire. Well, I don't have any hair anymore. But everyone's hair was on fire first trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to comply with SOX? And then how do we do that to where we don't slow down the operations of the business? And I think that's the toughest thing for even small business owners is how can you implement smart controls without really preventing the company from growing or slowing down operations, and really using the facet or the one criteria that makes small businesses really positive is the fact they're nimble, right? And that they can react in the market very quickly. But if you have a very complex internal control structure, it's burdensome, it actually might slow things down. So it's really a bit of a striking a balance and finding out what are your risks, and then just coming up with some smart controls, not only detect, but also prevent fraud.
Thank you for sharing. I feel like I do the same thing all day, except instead of financial controls, I've changed it to data.
So, Gary, once again, it's interesting you talk about your role in the gaming and other industries. And obviously, you have to allocate some budget towards privacy, cybersecurity, these controls. And so, how does managing this risk impact financial decisions or really, I guess, your overall business goals? We'll start there.
Yeah. So I'll state that it's not cheap, obviously, to do it right. And again, the more sophisticated your business model and operations are, the more you're going to have to allocate in your budget. Again, I'll draw a comparison. CleanSpark, for example, doesn't have a lot of the risks that maybe some other traditional businesses have, but we're still in the tech space. All of our miners connect to the internet. There is some concerns about individuals getting into our network and either shutting down miners or having some other negative effects on the operations of the business. So when we step back and we do a risk assessment, we really have to figure out, okay, what are the potential areas that we could be attacked, and where are we at in terms of what defenses we put up, and to what extent do we want to invest in further software or hardware or even insurance. And I'll tell you that, talking about insurance, for example, cyber insurance has gone through the roof recently because of a lot of the wire fraud and a lot of the data and privacy issues that we're seeing recently. So it's almost cost prohibitive for companies, and you can't rely on insurance anymore for your cyber risk. And a lot of cyber policies require you to have strong controls in your IT area anyways. And so to me, I think that if I'm looking at managing my risk, I want to make sure I'm investing in the very basic controls, which is firewalls, encryption, and training my people, right? Training team members and having clear and consistent communication amongst team members is important. So they always approach transactions with a healthy set of skepticism. But then you're also covering your bases on the boogeyman that you don't know is going to enter that might enter the door at night when no one's in the office, right? You got to worry about the international hackers coming in and doing things where you might not see it until after the chaos ensues. So to kind of boil that down to really one point, you really can't spend enough money on cybersecurity, and it really depends on a lot of your risks.
What are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on that?
Mr. Cyberman?
Mr. Cyberman? Oh, I'm a big fan of what Gary does. I've seen firsthand. So I just think it's interesting, Gary, how if we had this conversation, if you're the CFO for like a gaming company, and how you would view the cyber risk with all of the attendant risk with the data, their business processes, and how it's so completely different with a Bitcoin mining operation where you really don't have customers. The magnitude of risk is so different. And I think people don't realize that cyber and the budget and what you have to protect is just not a one size fits all proposition.
That's absolutely right. And you can't rely on insurance, because I think it's kind of like, let's think about property and casualty insurance, for example, right? Just because you have a business, you say, I'm just going to get P&C insurance just in case there's a fire. It doesn't mean that you can't take common sense steps, like let's not keep cans of gasoline inside the warehouse, right? Let's make sure things are permitted. Let's make sure we have a sprinkler system. All that common sense type stuff still needs to happen. You can't just rely on insurance, because insurance may not cover anything that happens. And frankly, if your business is down, it's just going to cause all kinds of problems. So again, you got to take some common sense steps, and then maybe you overlay it with insurance. Maybe that's part of your budget strategy. But you're right. There isn't a one size fits all, but it is a continual assessment business owners need to make.
And I would like to add one other precaution, is making sure that plastic does not get near the heating element in the dishwasher.
Says with the dishwasher running and a potential lost plastic item from one child's drinking cup.
Indeed.
So Gary, taking this risk a step further, how does all of this connect when you're identifying key vendors? And so thinking about a financial decision, you have different size vendors, you have large vendors, small vendors. How do you incorporate the cyber risk and those purchases?
So can you clarify the question a little bit? Is it a risk of selecting the right vendors or transactions with vendors?
So I think what we're trying to get at a little bit, Gary, here is when I think about mining operations, if somebody is working on the company website, they might get one level of concern. If somebody wants to be a host in the Bitcoin mining industry where they're going to be hosting other people's equipment, that
Right.
might require a whole different level of assessment of the cyber risk and how that could impact what you're willing to spend, the transaction, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there whenever you're dealing with parties, and I would throw it not just with vendors, which would include contractors or consultants, or anyone that's helping your project, but also your full-time employees and people in-house. But I think ultimately user access is at the top of the list, right? So if you're giving someone access to a sensitive part of your network, you need to make sure that that access is approved by the appropriate individuals and it's timed. So for example, if you have a consultant coming in and they need access to your mainframe or server for a period of time, and it's only going to take a week to do that, you shouldn't give them perpetual access and just give it to them and they're done with the project, and then and you never go back and revoke it. So that's one area that really can cause some exposure for people, is with regards to user access. So upfront, you want to make sure that the access is approved by the appropriate individuals. There's a time limit, and then there's a periodic review. So maybe it's every quarter or twice a year. You go through and you say, okay, let's look at this system and who has access to it, and figure out whether that access is appropriate, either read or write, or if they should even have access at all. So that's where I would go with that. Is really having some control around the access of really anyone, vendors or not.
So the theme of this episode is controls.
Absolutely. And I'd encourage anyone really look up COSO framework. I mean, it makes for great bedtime reading. There's 5 areas in COSO that talks about, what really makes this framework a near bulletproof framework. And by really implementing at least parts of COSO framework, I mean, look, us being a publicly traded company, we're required to, under Sarbanes-Oxley, to have a effectively designed and operating control environment, and all public companies pretty much assign their controls to the COSO framework. But you can have a lot of good learning lessons in there, because the way it's structured is just fantastic. It's a great way to detect and prevent issues. But internal controls absolutely is the foundation of anything here in terms of preventing any privacy or data leaks.
So with all of this privacy and security risk knowledge that you have, we always like to ask everyone, what is your best privacy or security tip that you might offer, at your local party? Maybe it's a Halloween party coming up.
Yeah, that's right. Privacy and security is going to be a big topic at the.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I make sure of it. A few things. One is change your passwords often. I think that's very important. And 2, I'm going to have a tip. Actually, I got this on my desk. I have to show you this, right? So I'm in the Bitcoin business, and I actively buy Bitcoin. And so what I did was I bought these orange dog tags, right? I have a whole bag full. And what I'm doing is, when I take my Bitcoin and I put it on cold storage on a ledger, I need to secure my 24 passphrase key. And it is recommended not to have it stored digitally or saved anywhere or on a piece of paper. It's recommended actually to etch it in metal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a Dremel, and I'm going to etch the words on this and put it in a safe deposit box in case there's a fire or anything, and no one can hack, obviously, metal. You'd have to get access to safe deposit box. So that's something recently I came across that I thought was genius, because even though you might pull down your crypto to a cold storage, if you lose that cold storage, you can typically recreate that if you have the passphrase with a new cold storage. So I think that's a good privacy tip for at least people that are in crypto.
And Gary, would you mind, for our audience, explaining to them what cold storage is?
Sorry. Yeah. So cold storage is basically taking it off of what's called a hot wallet. So for example, most people are familiar with Coinbase, right? So if you go and buy Bitcoin or crypto on Coinbase and leave it in the Coinbase account, that's considered a hot wallet. And it's hot because you can go in and very quickly go ahead and trade or buy or sell in the wallet. But what a lot of people are doing is they're taking it off of the exchanges and putting it into a cold wallet that's not powered. So it's basically a USB stick, special USB stick. and you take that crypto and your keys off of Coinbase and put it on this stick, and you can go ahead and secure it off the network, so to speak. And you do that for a bunch of reasons, one of which may be if there's a data breach that you can't control because someone gets into Coinbase because they didn't have the proper internal control structure and takes your crypto, you very well might be out your balances. And then also there's a lot going on with bankruptcy proceedings to see whether that crypto really, if you have crypto in hot wallet, whether that ends up being, you end up being an unsecured general creditor, which also might prevent you from getting your crypto. So cold storage is the best way to go if you're buying and hodling, as they say in the Bitcoin world. You're buying Bitcoin and just planning on keeping it for the long term. Cold storage is the way to go, and that's one way to make sure that no one can hack you. So I'd say that's my privacy and security tip for the day.
I think cold wallets is a cool Halloween time.
Now you're prepared.
Thank you for that explanation, Gary. So, when you're not being a CFO and giving great explanations about cold storage and Bitcoin, what do you like to do for fun?
Great question. So I work a lot. Obviously, we got a lot going on at CleanSpark, but I got two small children. I got two girls aged 9 and 6 right now, and love my life and love spending time with the family, getting outdoors. So, we're on computers all the time. Like I get the Bitcoin chart up right now, so I see all the transactions happening, and really I like just to disconnect and have a good cup of coffee in the woods and enjoy nature, family. So that to me is how I like to spend my downtime.
It does sound so nice. Walking with a hot cup of coffee and it's brisk outside. That sounds so much fun.
And there's actually some really cool places to hike and whatnot outside of Las Vegas. Last time I was there and I was looking out beyond the strip. There's some really cool places. So
there's a lot in Vegas that, off the strip, right? We got Red Rock, you got the Grand Canyon not far from us. We like to go to some of the Utah mountains. It's elevation 8,000 plus up there. So get some snow, and then we can come back down and not have to worry about shoveling our driveways pulled out. So,
well, Gary, we really appreciate your time and thoughts that you've shared today. If people would like to learn more, where should we send them?
Sure. So you could read more about CleanSpark and what we're doing at cleanspark.com, or you can follow me on Twitter. I have a professional Twitter page where I talk a lot about crypto and Bitcoin and accounting and financial reporting, maybe even a little bit of internal controls. And my handle there is Gary Vec. So it's Gary VEC.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we'll be sure to include that in the show notes.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate the chat.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.